we've got Sheila Cameron coming up. Sheila is the CEO of the LMA, and we've just had a great discussion with Sheila.
Yeah.
Guy, what have we got coming up on the conversation for our listeners?
She said some really interesting stuff about the importance of sponsorship, being authentic, being kind, and also knowing thyself as well. I think she said some really cool, interesting stuff about recognising whether you're an introvert or an extrovert and what's the makeup of the team. I thought some really insightful stuff and some really, really great takeaways.
Yeah, no, there are. She also covers what she thinks modern leaders should have, the difference between leaders now versus what they were like 10 years ago, and also talks about some of the mistakes she's made in her career, and some of the hardest moments. So lots to uncover, lots to unpack. Well, Sheila, thank you very much for joining us on the Damhurst podcast.
Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
Looking back over your career, what were the 2 or 3 moments that have really most shaped you as a leader?
If I look back early in my career, when I first came into the London market overall, it was back in 2002. And I'll be honest, I knew how to spell insurance when I got here. It was about the sum total of my knowledge at that point in time. And I was brought in as a project manager, so a change person, not an insurance expert. I was never meant to be an insurance expert in those early days. But I was hired by a gentleman called Stephen Beard, who's now over at Brown & Brown and one of the CEOs within the Brown & Brown family. I worked for Stephen as a project manager when he was COO of a part of Xchanging. And I think I lasted about a month or 2 in the project manager role. And he went, nope, you're coming over here. I want you to do some of these other things over here, but you need to learn about insurance. So he sponsored me. And he sponsored me to found me somebody to sit at a box with. He found me somebody to take me through what is a slip, what is verticalization in aviation, how do claims get paid in this marketplace overall. So he really sponsored me. He had faith in me. And he showed me the ropes. And to this day, I'm forever grateful to him. And I actually met up with him just before Christmas. And we had a brief chat about it. And genuinely, I don't think I'd be where I am today without him having initially sponsored me. But, for me, sponsorship is not just mentoring and a chat over a coffee. It's that proactive, no, I'm going to push you forward. I'm going to move you to this role. I'm going to get you introductions and conversations with the people that you need. So that was a key point for me.
Sorry to interrupt. I mean, it is amazing. We had that in our last conversations with in the last season, that sort of importance of having a advocate mentor who can really help.
But it's that active sponsorship. It's do stuff. Not just sit there and have a coffee and go, oh, that's terrible or that's lovely. Have you thought of doing X, Y, Z? It is, no, I'm going to find you people who you need to meet. I'm going to get you introductions. I'm going to get you this experience. I'm going to lobby for you in that boardroom about you getting this role or that role. It's that proactive sponsorship, I think, is really critical. I think the other key turning point for me was when I actually got this role, which was back in 2018, and it was Neil Maidment who was then the CEO of Beazley, and at the time he was the chairman of the LMA, together with Andrew Brooks, who then became chairman when I became CEO. And it was a big risk as two, pure play underwriters, I would call both of them, having been renowned for their underwriting expertise at both Beazley and Ascot. For them to take a risk on somebody who wasn't an underwriter was a huge risk to take, but they had absolute faith in me. Neil said to me afterwards, Neil, you really stood out amongst the candidates. You had heavily prepared. You had done your stuff. Yes, you weren't an underwriter, but you knew the right questions to ask around it. And that gave me the confidence to be able to, I can do this role. We can go for it. And I've, loved it ever since. And working with both Neil and Andrew in those early days, we really were able to complement each other. I could bring the non-underwriting and they brought the underwriting side of things. But as things have progressed and I've been able to build my team within the LMA. We have a new underwriting director joining us very, very imminently. Thanks to you guys for helping us with that. We've been able to progress forward around how underwriting and how critical a skill it is within the LMA by building the team around me, so that then we can push forward that underwriting agenda across the market. So I'd say the first point was that early sponsorship by Stephen Beard. The second point was the risk at which Neil Maidment and Andrew Brooks took in me in pushing me for this role. But I think the other one was a very deeply personal one, was around in 2008. My mum got diagnosed with terminal cancer. We'd been married about a year and we weren't getting anywhere with having kids. We were starting to go down the IVF route. And so I think the next 2 years were probably the toughest years of my life. In terms of, we went through multiple rounds of IVF, all of which failed until we did get fortunate enough to become pregnant with our eldest son. But also my mum passing away and going through cancer at that point. And I dropped down to a 9-day fortnight so I could go back to Dublin and spend every second weekend looking after her.
And you were doing that while doing IVF?
Whilst doing IVF at the same time, and whilst also working nearly full time. I was 0.9 of an FTE is what I moved to try and balance all of that out. But what it really demonstrated to me is you never know what's going on for somebody. They look fine. They turn up for work every day. They do their job. But actually, I was going into the toilets and injecting hormones in to try and get where I needed to be with IVF. I was trying to go home and look after my mum who was dying, every second weekend to try and give my sister who was there during the week, and I would try and take over at the weekends to try and support things. And you just never know what people are going through. So you know what? Be kind. You have no idea what somebody's going through in their home lives, and even though they may appear perfectly together, and you're only just holding it together. Yeah. But it taught me a lot about, it's not all about, what you do at work. You have to bring your whole self to work. And, people don't underestimate what people have going on at home. Be that, we were just talking as we were preparing for this interview. This morning, I got a phone call from my husband at home going, child number 3 is really, really ill this morning. One of us is going to have to stay home. And I'm like, well... lucky you, was the answer this morning. But you just don't know what's going on for people behind the scenes, and take an interest. And that's part of being a leader. Look at the whole person in front of you, not just the output that they produce.
And were you at Hiscox at the time when that?
So I was leaving. So when my mum was diagnosed and we were starting to go down the IVF route was 2008. I left Xchanging at that point in time, towards the back end of 2008 and early 2009, and joined Hiscox at that point in early 2009, where I again came in a change role. So I came in just doing a major change program. And actually that was, I would say, the decision that proved most risky to me. If I think through a risky decision that I took, was I came into Hiscox. I was brought in to do a major change program, a massive technology revolution. And I came in, and within 3 months, I was like, you need to stop this program. This is a pointless program. It is not going to succeed because you don't have buy-in. The business case doesn't quite stack up. You need to stop this program. And Bronick said to me afterwards, Bronick Maciado was the CEO of Hiscox at the time, he said, that was the first time I noticed you. So you came in, you were brought in to do that role, and you told us to stop it because it was the right thing to do. And it was the right thing to do, but you were effectively putting yourself out of a job. It's like, yes, I was, but I also knew that Hiscox as an organisation, and I have faith in Hiscox as an organisation, hires great people, and it will put great people wherever it needs to put them and wherever the need is. And if I can demonstrate to you that I will make the right decisions for you as a business, for Hiscox as a business, then I think you'll stick by me. So I'm going to be brave and have the courage to make that call. And he was like, yeah, that was the right call to make.
Amazing.
What gave you the inner confidence, the inner courage to be brave? Going into a new role, challenging the CEO of Hiscox and saying no is a brave, courageous thing to do. And I'm just thinking for our listeners, what gave you that inner courage, that inner confidence?
So I talk a lot about my own personal values, and I do truly believe that people shouldn't have more than 2, max 3 of their own values. And for me, one is kindness, which I've already spoken about in terms of understanding what's going on for the people around you and for yourself. and the other is around courage. And genuinely, I don't know where it comes from. I think it comes from a sense of fairness and wanting to do the right thing and be fair and call stuff out, because people don't. And it's very easy to sit back and go, yeah, well, I'll just keep going and it would have been very easy to keep going with that programme. But I couldn't, in good conscience and in good faith, have gone, yeah, you're just going to spend money hand over fist, when I could have called it earlier. And it's the right thing to do, to have that courage of your conviction. And it's really important for me to maintain that courage and maintain that authenticity and maintain that true voice. And that's part of who I am. It's fundamental to who I am. And, that's why I want to play in it all of the time and dwell on it all of the time and ensure that it comes through in everything that I say and do, that I'm being as courageous and calling stuff out. And that's why I really enjoy the role that I'm in right now. It is about calling that stuff out. But sometimes I have to be very careful about how I call that out. And it might be behind closed doors, with Lloyd or with the regulator, go, no, this is wrong because of A or B or C, or Mr. or Mrs. Regulator, you're not looking at this the right way because you need to think of X and Y and Z, which, is important for us as the managing agent community. But then it's about, well, how should I put that publicly? Because I can't say, well, they're wrong on this or that or the other, or we're wrong on X or Y or Z. But it is about trying to work through the communication style to still be true to myself, to be authentic to myself, but having the courage to call it out in the right rooms at the right time in the right way.
And how have you approached? Because it's one thing to say, that's in me. That's what I believe. They're my values. But what about the culture of the organisations at the LMA that you've created as a leader, that existed within Hiscox at the time, that enabled you to be your truth self? Can you speak to that a little bit?
One of the best lessons I learned from Hiscox was around how it is a values-driven organisation. And I didn't realise how important that was to me until I wasn't there anymore. And how important it was to me to create an organisation within the LMA which was very, very values-driven. And that which we hire people to values, and not, that they have we assume that they have the technical skills. Of course, we check for that, but it's not just the technical skills, it's more the values that people demonstrate. And that's what we want to drive forward. So when you don't have a values-driven organisation, that's where I've ended up going, we have a misalignment here. I'm not sure I can keep working in this sort of an organisation. For me, it always comes back to individuals, and it's who you work for within those organisations and the values that they demonstrate and that they choose to demonstrate. But it's also about those organisations in terms of what values do they choose to prioritise, and do they actually live them? So I'm not interested in the values on the wall. I don't care. It's about how you live it day in and day out. During COVID, for me, when we were all working from home, we called it quite early and said, everybody goes home. Just go home. We will figure this out. So before Lloyd's had closed down, before firms had closed down, I know you're all scared. You don't need to be coming in on the train. We will figure this out. Just go home and we will work this out, and we will work it through. And put your family first. We're in a really lucky place where we are within the LMA. Nobody's going to die because the LMA doesn't have a committee meeting. Nobody's going to die because of that. We are not doing brain surgery. Let's calm down and let's live by those values of kindness, of taking care of each other as we work our way through this, and put your family first. It is that sort of an attitude that I think is often missing from the corporate values that are on the wall, so to speak. It's about how you work is just as important as what you do. And I really firmly believe that. It's how you work and how you go about interacting with people is just as important as what you do.
And on that point of courage, because I do think courage is a leadership quality. And for any listener who's an aspiring leader, sometimes what can get in the way of courage is actually self-doubt, or imposter syndrome. If the kernels of self-doubt do appear, I mean, how do you either live with that, ignore, and then carry on to and continue forward and speak up?
So first of all, everybody has this self-doubt, and anybody who says otherwise is a liar.
Yeah.
Frankly, everybody goes through this, and it is not just a female thing or a male thing. It is everybody goes through it.
Yeah.
And every leader goes through it as well. Of course, we all sit there and go, shoot, have I got this right? Did I, I'm getting such pushback about this idea. Maybe I've gone the wrong way about it. And of course, we all have those moments. But for me, it's around who's in your personal boardroom around you. And what advice, go and talk to them. I talk to my chairman, Sean McGovern, a lot and go, Sean, I can go this way or that way on this. And what do you think? Should we take this line or that line? Should we push this particular point forward, or should we push that point forward? And bouncing that around with trusted people in your own personal boardroom. I have different people for different things. I have two NEDs. Female NEDs that I talk to a lot around female leadership and which way do we go, and how do I address this, and how should I take that particular point forward. When it comes to some of the financial matters, I have another person that I go to who's both an actuary and actuary and a former FD. I go, please come and talk to me about this. Which way should we go on this particular topic? So I have I call it a personal boardroom, and it depends on what the topic at hand is. But do I have self-doubt every day of the week?
Yeah.
And anybody who says they don't is lying, as I said. But it's about having those trusted people around you that you can turn to, and you can go and have that conversation and go, should I do this or that? What's your recommendation? What do you think of X or Y? I'm thinking X, but I can see this side of Y. How would you balance that out? And having those people around you, trusted confidence that you can have that conversation with, is the critical thing. And then you can take those ideas forward and run with them.
How have you gone about creating and curating that personal boardroom? You've mentioned sort of building at Hiscox, the project team at the LMA, going about building that team. How, for our listeners listening that think this is all great ideas, but the practicalities of going about building that high performing team, building that personal boardroom, how have you gone about building those relationships?
So my role is all about relationship management. Yeah. It's day in, day out. That's what I have to do. And for me, it's a process on the relationship management side of things. So, for example, I have a brilliant assistant, and I have a spreadsheet of every CEO in the marketplace. It's a process. I have a spreadsheet of every CEO in the marketplace. Am I meeting them at least twice a year? When is that set up? Is it in the diary? How what am I going to go through with them? I have a little part of my notebook that I keep. Here's my CEO catch-ups. Here's what I want to go through, and that evolves all of the time. But I literally apply a process to it. It is make sure that I manage and maintain those relationships, that I meet with every CEO of every managing agent at least twice a year, that I meet with every member of the Lloyd's Exco at least every 6 to 8 weeks on a one-to-one basis, that I meet Patrick Tiernan at least every 2 weeks, that I meet Sean McGovern every single week we have an 8:30 call every Friday morning. But it is a process, and I make sure that I pay attention and I water those relationships, and I make an effort to get in front of those people and ensure that I'm meeting my customers' needs, because those are my customers. My customers are all of the managing agent CEOs, and I need to know how they're feeling, what they want from me, what they want from the market, what they want from Lloyd's. So I make a point of nurturing them. In terms of my own personal boardroom, it's about people I have met over the years, and the relationship that I have with them has become incredibly strong over time. We've grown to trust each other. We've made sure that we spend time together. We've made sure that, I go for that coffee, that it's not, oh, I'm too busy, I've got a million things to do. I have a million things to do every day of the week, as we all do. But it's, where do you choose to spend your time? And when I came into this role, one of the things that I was questioning was, what do people value in the LMA? What do they value from the LMA, particularly at a CEO level? And one of the things was that they said to me, well, I want to know how I compare to everybody else. Am I doing okay compared to everybody else? So back to your point around, CEOs and doubt and all the rest of it. Every one of us have it. But they want to know how they're comparing to everybody else and their peers in the marketplace. But they also want to know, well, and what's going on in Lloyd's? What's going to come out next? Where are they going to go? Or they have particular issues with Lloyd's or what's going on in the marketplace, and they want me to speak up about them. But it's as simple as that. It's about understanding what value do my customers derive from me, and then what do I need to give back to them. But in order to do that, I've got to maintain those relationships, and I've got to spend the time out there building those relationships, spending the time with people, no matter what my to-do list says. So, and my assistant knows those meetings are sacrosanct. And if they have to follow the diary for, because the CEO needs to move, the CEO meeting needs to move, that's fine. Get it back in. Get it back in as soon as we can. And let's make sure that I continue to have those conversations, that I have my finger on the pulse of how the marketplace is feeling. And I'm reflecting that truly and fairly and accurately.
And looking back on your career, have there been any key failures or professional setbacks, and how, if there have been, have you dealt with them?
Yeah, so when I first came into the LMA, I needed to make a lot of changes to the structure that we had within the LMA, and I had the backing of the board and the chair at the time to do that. And that meant I needed to bring in quite a number of new people into the organisation. And what happened was that people were quite fearful within the organisation of that degree of change all happening at the same time. And I didn't anticipate that enough. And I didn't worry about that. I didn't prepare the organisation enough for that. But then on top of that, as I brought in new people, they did the same thing. And so there ended up being a long number of months when the organisation was very, very unsettled. And I hadn't seen that coming. And subsequently, I was like, kicking myself, going, I should have seen that one coming. And I should have done more to prepare the organisation. And I should have done more of almost rip off the Band-Aid, do it all in one go and move forward from there, rather than, what must have felt to some people like death by a thousand cuts, because it kept going and going and going in terms of some of the change we needed to make to the organisation as a whole. So I definitely learned a lot of lessons through that process. Change was needed at that point in time, and I had the buy-in of the board to do it. And I think how we've evolved the organisation from when I came in 2019 to today, I think it's a very, very different organisation, and it's very much for the better in terms of how we've repositioned ourselves and the culture that we've driven within the LMA. But it was really hard in those early days for the people who were there, who were watching all this change going on, going, oh, am I going to be next? What's going to happen? Is my job safe? Am I okay? And it led to a drop in productivity and real unease. And I should have done more to help the organisation through that. And it led to a culture where people were scared of making mistakes. So I then had to make a big play of talking about the mistakes that I've made and the mistakes that I've made along the way. We had a session last week with all staff. We were talking about what's going on in the Middle East and how we're responding to it. And we have Neil Roberts, who's our head of Marine. And Neil was talking through, his relationships with NATO, his relationships with the government. He's fascinating, absolutely fascinating on the entire topic. But I'd made a mistake last week on something I had said publicly, and I made a point of bringing that up in the all staff forum, that all colleague forum that we had on Friday. Going, I've told my hands up, guys. I made an absolute boo boo over here. I said this when I said X when I meant to say Y. Fortunately, it didn't. People didn't really notice it, but I knew it. And I just want you all to be aware that when you're in the middle of such a big thing as what's going on in the Middle East at the moment, and how insurance is responding, and the government response to this, and the US administration's response, and all that's going on with all of that, it's really difficult to get these public messages right. And I make a point of not setting up throwing everybody into a room. I want the rest of the LMA to see us going, no, arguing over, is it this word or that word? Shall we use this word or that word? Because I want people to see and experience it and learn from it. Because what we're going through now, hasn't been seen probably since 2001 to the same extent. So, I'm not going to be around for the next episode of something similar happens. And I want the people around us to be able to learn from our mistakes and the mistakes that we made and the experience that we're going through, and why language is so important when you're out there trying to give the position of the market, trying to explain what our marine war underwriters are doing, why they're doing it the way that they're doing it, why language is so important, and why we try and make sure that we're talking accurately, but also ensuring that from a government perspective we're not causing any problems from a legal perspective, from a governmental perspective, from a regulatory perspective. We have to think through all of these different angles at the same time. But it's important to talk about the mistakes. And there's you can end up with a fear culture, and people get scared of making mistakes because they think, oh, well, I'm going to be fired for making a mistake. It's like, no, the CEO needs to talk about the mistakes they've made too. We all make them. Nobody is perfect. Ask my kids, believe me. I had one of them say to me earlier this week, you spend more time with the other two than you do with me. I'm like, oh. But, they're my much bigger critics than anybody in the office or any CEO around this, around the market. I did say a line a few years ago around, I'm a mum first and a CEO second. And I remember my son saying to me, they came in, this was when the portraits were being launched in the old library. And I was saying to my son, I can't make whatever, some event he had, a match he had on. I said, I have to go to this work meeting. And he said, but Mama, you said you were a mama first and a CEO second. I'm like, put your shoes on. Come on, we can do this. We can do that. Okay, I will go and change the meeting. And I went to the match. But it was, the biggest critics are actually at home rather than in the office or in the press or in the CEO community in the market.
Yeah.
Do you think that's how do you think kind of leadership culture has changed over the years that you've been in the market? Do you think there is more acceptance of the human side of leadership, where you can make or own up to mistakes now, and it's a safer environment industry to do that?
I think there's a greater demand for authenticity from our leaders, and to not be, yes, everything's fine here, jazz hands. No. There of course that people make mistakes, but it is about being authentic, about why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you going this way rather than that way? Why did you choose to take route X rather than route Y? It is being able to explain these things, but it's also being able to talk to one's own personal experiences. People want to know who you really are. At a CEO level, the vast majority, I think, are willing to have those conversations and talk to you about what the balance of the home life and the work life is about. Because it is expected now to be much more authentic and much more real. It is not just about bang the table, hit the numbers, yay, we've made that great big, we've landed that client, let's all go out and celebrate loads. Of course, those celebrations are important, but it's also important about being authentic.
And can I ask, in terms of the journey up to becoming a CEO, becoming a leader, I was hoping to revisit the idea of sponsorship, and you said that was a great help in the early part of your career, but how did you go about being sponsored? Because it doesn't naturally happen to everybody in an organisation, and there might be people out there thinking, what's great, sponsorship, mentoring, coaching, but how do I get that person to mentor and sponsor me?
I think mentoring, you can ask. I think sponsorship, you need to be chosen in a way. So I didn't ask to be sponsored by Stephen, but he saw the potential in me and pushed it forward. I was quite different to all the people, others in the organisation. Like I said, I knew how to spell insurance when I walked in the door, but I was determined to learn, and I was really hungry to learn. I had very disciplined processes and structures. I'd come from Accenture, so I had started my career in Accenture in Dublin. So I came in with lots of structure and a real project management and change management approach to life, which was a really different skill to everybody else around me. So I knew I stood out from that perspective. I made a point of listening to people, of learning. So I'd been taught at Accenture, don't just assume you know, go and sit with a person, go and enter in that data into the system and see what it's actually like to do that and how you ascertain what information you get out. Go and do it, do the job. So I would make a point of understanding the detail. I'd make a point of trying to understand, but how do you look at the slip in that way? And why do you enter in the data? So lots of whys. So I was just very, very curious. But it had come from some of my training from an Accenture perspective, but also more on the people side. I was genuinely trying to build more relationships. I wanted to understand more about the organisation. I wanted to understand more about insurance. And I was gradually falling in love with all the things that is Lloyd's. And I think if you cut me in half, it probably says Lloyd's as like a stick of rock through me. But I think he saw the potential in terms of I was different. I was asking questions. I was seeking to build relationships, and I was thinking about how to communicate things. So, I was putting in place the right governance structures. I was thinking about how I'm going to get buy-in into what I'm trying to achieve in the projects that he brought me in to do. And I think it was just different. I think he also had a need because he also wanted to move up levels. And you can never move up a level until the people are comfortable with your successor and who that successor is going to be. So I think it was a mutually beneficial relationship from that perspective. But also because I came in with a very, very different skill set to everybody else around me. But I do think sponsors, if sponsors are the ones who can go, let me help you take this forward. I think sponsors also have an obligation to make sure that they are looking for different types of people with different skill sets and not just cookie cutters of themselves.
That's such a good point. Yeah.
That's the bit that is really important for me. I was talking to somebody yesterday about sponsorship and how important sponsorship is. And she was saying to me she had no idea what sponsorship actually meant until she was properly forced to speak up in the boardroom when the person isn't there, and understanding those obligations, but also understanding it's your job to find those diamonds in the rough. And I reckon I was very much in the rough when I was first sponsored. But that's what it's about. And that's what a good leader will do, is they will find those diamonds in the rough and help shape them and bring them forward and give them the sponsorship that they need and speak up for them in those boardrooms, ensure that they get those promotions, ensure that they get that access, ensure they get the opportunity to build those relations that they need in order to progress forward. But there's a huge responsibility on sponsors not to just pick carbon images of themselves. And that's a big deal for me, around trying to find that capability and find that difference. Don't just hire an image of yourself.
So the idea of diversity is important, but diversity of perspective is just as, if not more important.
Go for those different people. Go for those different voices. It's one of on my own leadership team, I know that I have too many introverts. And I would consider myself an introvert, which people find crazy, but I do consider myself an introvert. And I have too many introverts. So I've made a point of I now need to go out and hire extroverts. So I have 2 on the team now, but I'm probably at the next time that we have some changeover, I will need to make sure I'm going out and finding another extrovert, even though that'll go completely against me and how I would normally hire. I'm like, nope. You need to challenge yourself now and go and find another extrovert, please, to balance out the team.
That is interesting that you consider yourself an introvert.
Hugely so.
Is that because you energize by, having a bit of time to yourself?
Completely. So if you were to ask my husband when I come home, I'll just leave me be for an hour. I just need to decompress. I do get energy from being around people. So there's a concept called social introversion. So I describe myself as a social introvert. So I do get some energy from being around people, but mostly... and I love going out and meeting CEOs one-to-ones, all those sorts of things. I love being on panels and talking to people at conferences and all those sorts of things. I get lots of energy from those. But I know when I come home, I just need quiet time on my own. One of the things that I do to get time on my own is I walk into work. So I live 10 kilometres away. But I walk into work at least twice a week.
Amazing, you do that. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, so I walk in twice a week.
We live quite close to each other.
Yeah,
I would
do.
never consider.
No, I walk in twice a week so that I have time on my own, and I know I love to I absorb information hourly, so I love to listen. So I have back-to-back podcasts. My team know if you want to get me a present, you buy me a subscription to a particular.
What's your go-to podcast?
The Damhurst podcast,
obviously. I go to The Rest is Politics. On leadership, I listen a lot to John Amici, Brené Brown, Adam Grant. I listen to lots of political ones. I listen to lots of insurance ones. So Mark Gagan, the Insurance Insider ones. So I have a whole load that I'm constantly listening to. Ian Dunt is another one I've just started listening to. Lots on leadership. I find fascinating as well. So I spend a lot of time listening to leadership podcasts. But John Amici is probably the one who from a leadership perspective, is probably the most influence of me, because he talks about culture is defined by the poorest behaviour you're prepared to walk past. That's your culture.
Well, that's
which
fair.
I thought was it's a really great way of putting it. So I first met him when Lloyd's was going through the Bloomberg issues. And Lloyd set up a cultural advisory group, and he was brought in as a leadership consultant to advise us on that. And I remember going to meetings with him, and you'd think you'd have it all nailed, and I'd walk out with a headache. I mean that in the best possible way, because he'd make your head hurt. You're not thinking of this, you've not thought of that, you're not thinking of the other. And I actually met him about a month ago for breakfast, and we caught up. And he's still fascinating on so many topics. He's worth following on LinkedIn. He does lots of podcasts as well. So he's but very, very insightful. But similarly, Brené Brown and Adam Grant did one recently where they talked about what are your own values and how to get to the nub of what is your value, what are your 2 or 3 values, and why are they truly important to you. And they challenged each other on it. It was fascinating listening to them.
Any songs, any music that when you're walking in, what's the one song that motivates you? Got a particularly challenging day, what motivates you? What gets you up if you had to listen to one song?
So my husband is the music person in our house rather than me, but I've just started listening to some music by Ludovico Einaudi, who is more of a classical pianist.
Him. Yeah.
Oh my word! I was listening to. My head was a bit full this morning, so I was like, I need music. So I just put some of his music on. Oh my word!
Yeah,
it just Primavera is just love it. So
especially on a morning like this.
Exactly, it was a beautiful morning. It's spring and summer is coming in. It just is so uplifting, and it's a full orchestra behind him. And there's no lyrics or anything, but it's just that he's just an amazing pianist. So, and my mother made me go to piano school when I was a kid, and didn't we all go through that? We all had to learn some instrument, but that was it for me.
Great. Well, Sheila, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I've really enjoyed that.
Yes, thank you.